Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffman coming at you with another APGov video. This is our fourth video focusing in on topic 1.8, constitutional interpretations of federalism. Now, last time we were here, we were talking about how that relationship between the federal government and the state governments was being defined early in our nation's history because of the impact of this dude right here, once again, Chief Justice John Marshall of the U.S. Supreme Court. And we mentioned previously that through the court case McCulloch versus Maryland, we see, the last Federalist, as he will be dubbed, will see the federal government have a broad interpretation of federal power in terms of, bigger power versus the states. So expanded use of federal power under the Necessary and Proper Clause, expanded use of federal power via the Supremacy Clause. But today we're going to take a look at another court case, this one Gibbons v. Ogden, that's going to be taking a look at another component of federalism, but this time as it pertains to federal authority via the Commerce Clause. And so real quick, before we get into the deets of the case, let's just review what the Commerce Clause says. Commerce Clause is located in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Once again, that's basically where all of your federal enumerated powers are found right there. It says that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Now, you'll note what I've highlighted right there because that's going to be of importance for what we're talking about here. That Congress has the power to regulate what we call interstate commerce. Business across state lines. So if it's talking about business that takes place across state lines, that is not a state power. That is an enumerated federal power. Now, what the question is, though, is how far does interstate commerce go? Where do you draw that line between what is state commerce and interstate commerce? And we're going to see the Marshall Court early on try to address what that meaning is with the case of Gibbons v. Ogden. Now, to give you a little background on that case here, and note this is not one that you have to know by name, but in the Gibbons v. Ogden case, this is basically taking a look at a case focusing in on controlling a shipping monopoly that was taking place across the Hudson River from New York to New Jersey. In other words, could a New York, could a company be awarded a monopoly via the New York government to control that shipping across the Hudson, or could the New Jersey government issue a monopoly to another company to control that commerce, that shipping across the Hudson River? And the Hudson River is what separates New York from New Jersey, so just FYI. And so this was brought to the court's attention, and what the court is going to be saying is that, well, neither New York nor New Jersey can actually have that power to determine shipping rules across the Hudson River, because those ships are going across state lines. They're traversing those state lines. Therefore, it is interstate commerce. It's going across state lines, and therefore the only governing authority regarding shipping that's going across the Hudson River, that's going to be the federal government. So that's going to be another example of the federal government getting added, broadened powers via the John Marshall Court. And note, when we do talk about, the Gibbons v. Ogden ruling, it also kind of sets in place what is going to be a long-term style of relationship that's going to exist between the federal government and the state governments in what is known as dual federalism. Dual federalism is basically the idea that you have certain realms of government that are only under the purview of the states. That's it. And then you've got areas of governing that are only under the purview of the federal government. That is it. And these are clearly separated. There's no overlap. They are segregated. They are kept separated. And political scientists have long used the example of a layer cake to try to, kind of explain this. The idea being is that in a layer cake, let's say you have a chocolate layer and you have a vanilla layer. In a traditional layer cake, those two layers of cake are kept separate. You've got that icing in the middle that separates the chocolate and the vanilla layers, and therefore they don't touch, they don't overlap, they don't, come into contact with one another. So in other words, the federal government is going to be doing only things that are the federal government's authority. The states will only do things that the states can do, and basically everything could be explained. It's either a federal power or a state power. They don't work together. They don't work cooperatively. They just have their own separate realms. And that's going to kind of define what that relationship is going to be, for about 100 years. And even though we see early on some of these rulings made by Marshall's Court that will certainly broaden the authority of the federal government at this critical early time, still, though, throughout, the 1820s till, the start of the New Deal, the federal government's power is still going to be pretty darn limited compared to what it is today. Now, that's important to keep in mind. Now, later on, we'll get into talking about how those lines kind of blur a little bit between federal and state authority, and that's what we're going to call the marble cake model. But for right now, just understand that traditionally there was a very clear separation between the two. So, like, for example, public education was purely a state authority. Federal government had nothing to do with federal government had nothing to do with public education, in the late 1800s. That was purely a state thing, not a federal thing at all. Today, we have a federal Department of Education, so that has changed over that time period. And note, when we do talk about that change over time, even though we're going to have this layer cake model for, kind of traditionally in American history, we should know that as we get, more and more into the 20th century, kind of starting with the progressives and then continuing through most of the rest of the century, you will see the Commerce Clause commonly be used as a rationale for expanding more and more and more federal authority. We know that the progressives, are going to use federal authority to try to, improve workplace conditions, for example, to try to strike down trusts. And where is the federal government get the authority to, create antitrust laws and create workplace, safety laws and stuff like that? Well, that's tied with interstate commerce. So that's where the federal government gets that authority, and it will continue to grow and grow. And, as we get into the New Deal era, it will really start to see a growth of federal authority that many had not even perhaps conceived of. There's the famous, Wickard case, where you have an Ohio farmer that had been, growing wheat and was basically growing wheat for only use in the state of Ohio. So you have an Ohio farmer growing wheat in Ohio to be used in Ohio. But the federal government still asserted the authority to regulate that farmer's practices via the Agricultural Adjustment Act in the 1930s. And when this farmer sued, claiming that, hey, this is an overreach of the federal government, this is not interstate commerce, I'm not growing wheat in different states, I'm not moving the wheat from one state to another, it's owned, produced, sold in the state of Ohio only. The Supreme Court unanimously said that, well, no, the federal government still has authority. Why? Well, the explanation is that when you grow wheat, even if you're only producing it, selling it in one state, it is part of a larger national commodity of wheat. And basically, the more wheat that is produced on a national level, that's going to affect the price of that wheat. More wheat being produced nationally, the price of that wheat goes down, and vice versa. So even if you are producing and selling that commodity, that product, in one state only, it still has national impact. And if it has a national impact, then the court says that the federal government can regulate that via the Commerce Clause. So it really, really expands. We even see the Commerce Clause be expanded in its authority and power to help support the constitutionality of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. For those of you not familiar, the Civil Rights Act is going to include provisions that stipulate that you cannot discriminate with regards to public accommodations, with regards to race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, gender, etc. Now note, as you can imagine, there were some Southern establishments that were not big fans of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And one of those establishments was a hotel called the Heart of Atlanta. And what this hotel did is that they said that they did not believe that the federal government had the authority to create the Civil Rights Act, in part because the Interstate Commerce Act only applies to interstate commerce. So in other words, if you are a singular hotel in one state, one location, how can you then justify that you're engaging in interstate commerce? Well, the court is going to say, though, well, yes, Heart of Hotel, though you may be one location in one state, you are still engaging in interstate commerce. And there's a litany of reasons why. For example, first and foremost, some of, if not most of your guests are going to be coming in from other states. So they are traveling across state lines to use your services. Beyond that, the products that you use as part of your hotel, be it, where you get your bed sheets, where you get your toilet paper, where you get, let's say you have a restaurant in the hotel, where you get your food, your plates, all silverware, all that kind of stuff. Almost certainly that's going to be coming across state lines. So there's many different levels that are going to assert that if you're a hotel, you're engaging in interstate commerce. And if you're engaging in interstate commerce, then the federal government can regulate how you run your business, including who you are required to allow to be patrons of that service. So one of the key things you want to understand is that the Commerce Clause, in line with the Necessary and Proper Clause, but perhaps maybe even more so, is going to be stretched and stretched and stretched throughout the 20th century for the most part, and in doing so, giving the federal government more and more and more authority. And it's going to seem, as we kind of get to the end of the 20th century, that the federal government could pretty much say, hey, we can kind of do almost seemingly whatever we want and can pretty easily tie it to power via the interstate commerce. However, that is going to start to change by the time we get to the 1990s. A more conservative Supreme Court is going to push back on that and create some boundaries and some borders as to what that's going to be. And we will get into examples of that next time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.